Yeah, sort of a rambling video tonight. I wanted to explain some things regarding close friendships, okay, and how some of those close friendships fall apart. It's not for a lack of empathy or for um, simply arguing with each other, but once you come to fundamental disagreements with each other, you, I believe you need to take a stand and you need to argue your point. And once that point doesn't get you anywhere anymore, and if the other party is not listening anymore at all, then that essentially spells the end of that friendship, at least in the present. Not in the past. Not that in the past it wasn't a friendship, because it was, but in the present it simply cannot function in any realistic way. So let me seg into this. Many years ago, you know, 15, perhaps almost 18 years ago, I got into a major disagreement with one of my very, very best friends. And I mean, we were really close. And the argument evolved around the internet and the commercialization of the internet. Now, we were both in grad school at the time, and we were, both of us were studying in the field of art. Now, as a side job, we all had to have side jobs because none of us were independently wealthy, so we had to support our, endeavor in the university and so on. So nobody just, went to university on pure scholarships or anything like that. So both of us worked in different fields, and the way I made my living, supplementing my income while going through grad school, was through basically a scientific sort of approach, and my friend, on the other hand, took some corporate job, eventually ending up at Clear Channel, and it was basically, it became really involved in computer programming and so on. So she knew a lot about programming and computers, all the technical aspects. And during our discussions, it eventually, came to it wasn't a direct confrontation, but it was a philosophical confrontation, more or less. Because I maintained that while she was proclaiming that, look, all these companies are doing is simply placing cookies on your computer. You don't have to be afraid of that stuff. It just simply enhances your experience on the internet. So you can, it's going to be more convenient for you, even on an academic level, to look up anything on the internet, because it's not going to harm you. None of your personal information is going to be in any way compromised. It simply enhances your experience. And I never, ever believed this from the very beginning. And as it turns out now, perhaps I was right. Because the very commercial entities who've been collecting our data since that time, 18, 20 years ago, have amassed so much personal data about us that they essentially serve as a vast database for the NSA to simply plug into in order to get all that information. So this was essentially my major concern 15 years ago, and I stated this to my friend. This was my major concern to start with. And unfortunately, that has exactly come to pass. Now, I'm not dissing my friend on a personal level. She still actually works in a university, and she's an assistant professor and all this, while I'm completely on the outside of that spectrum now, because I did not buy into this. How should I call this? In this ultimate belief that technology will solve all of our problems. Now, since I've sort of worked on the scientific end of it, not on the technological end per se, but on the more scientific, basic scientific research, and I'm not, my degree is not at all in this field, but I recognize that there are endeavors out there which are not concerned at all without any kind of commercialism. And this is basically why I went into art or art making in the first place. It wasn't to make money. It wasn't to get rich through having some, gallery represent me in the art world or something like that. It was always about communicating things and ideas to others. So eventually we had this rift, we had this phenomenal rift in thinking, which persists to this day. It's not that, it's hard to even explain this kind of rift, okay? Because we were the best of friends. We helped each other out on every level until the point where my friend moved into this corporate arena. And after that happened, the communication between us became completely different. And all I can say is to fellow artists out there, if you're simply doing it for the money and to be successful commercially, you've already lost. This is not playing the poor artist game or anything like that. But if you can't, if you can't think about things on a larger intellectual level, other than just, placing yourself in a position to make a living via your art, then you're already compromised. So this is what I basically moved away from, and this is precisely why I'm not making art anymore, because art itself in the United States, for sure, is completely compromised and commercialized. There are highlights, you can still see certain highlights every once in a while, but these are so marginal that they really don't affect society in any major aspect anymore. And so, speaking as an American, since I've lived here for most of my life now, it really, it is irrelevant how you want to, you can't get through to the larger public by making esoteric art being collected by people who you may agree with on the philosophical level, but when all these esoterics are no longer even being discussed in the larger sphere, this is self-defeating. And my friend actually had this idea of making art more commercially accessible. And then she actually had the idea of putting, esoteric art and having it marketed by Walmart, which I thought was a completely crazy idea. And of course, nobody took her up on it, and she got laughed out of the business world, essentially. It's very hard. It's very hard to maintain any kind of integrity in this, commercialized consumer world. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. There's no real way out of it completely because we're all somehow tied to it. But always look out for things that are just marginally placed on the internet. Don't go for the talk shows or whatever, I mean, it's just idiotic. In any case, anybody with any integrity out there is not going to sell themselves out that easily. I mean, it's one thing to make a living in a field, to pay the rent, so to speak, but it's quite another to sell out all of your ideas almost completely. And this is what has happened, essentially, in America. And if you look at the art world in America today, it's in a pretty sorry state. It is either so esoteric to where the public, nobody even has a connection to it anymore. Or on the other hand of the spectrum, it's become so commercialized as to be totally idiotic. And this is essentially my reason for leaving this kind of art world altogether. I don't think it is effective. I think it's in some ways actually counterproductive. And even though I regard science as equally prone to corruption, this needs to be said, by the way, because certain research projects will get funded over other projects. So it's not above, pure science or pure scientific research is not above corruption by any means. It's just as prone to it as any other field. But for the time being, there's still, I believe, a little more integrity left than in other fields at this point. Now, we all know that big pharma and big corporations are very much influencing even basic research. But as far as my field is concerned, the field of art, so to speak, it is utterly subjective. Not able to answer to anything objective in the least. And while I have still some affinity towards it, I understand the emotional aspect of it, the humanity behind it, you might say. It has to have some sort of a balance, especially in the United States, where science is actually being trashed in the commercial media in favor of completely idiotic beliefs. And so going back to my friend from years ago, the intentions were all good, but unfortunately this commercialization of the internet, including cookies, didn't work out so well, did they? Because the corporate control over the entire internet is so encompassing at this point that unfortunately I think I'll be proven right. It's not to, I'm not saying this to win a game, you know. It's just the way it is. Good night.